Good morning and hello. Welcome to this month's webcast, How Nonprofits Can Flourish with Employee Engagement. Today's webcast is brought to you by 501c Agencies Trust. 501c Agencies Trust is the nation's oldest and largest unemployment program. If you are at a 501c3 and have more than 15 full-time employees, it would benefit you to contact 501c Agencies Trust and see how much money they can help you save on your unemployment insurance. Many of you on today's webcast are already working with 501c Agencies Trust, and we would like to thank you for continuing to participate in our program. Before I get to our panel this morning, I'm going to go ahead, or this afternoon, I'm going to go ahead and do a bit of housekeeping. If I get my slides to work. I'll just skip the housekeeping slide since it didn't show up on time. If you take a look at your browser in front of you, the UI, the user interface for today's webcast, you'll see that the speakers are on the right-hand side. There are event resources below the Ask a Question box. So if you open that up, you'll get several PDFs. One of them is today's presentation in PDF form. There's also information from our two speakers and their organizations. So if you want to know more about them, you can download those PDFs and take them with you. It has their contact information as well. If you have a question for us, you see the question box right below my photo there. Go ahead and submit those to us, and we will answer them periodically through the presentation, and then we have a Q&A section at the end. Since the webcast is going specifically through your browser, if for some reason it starts to buffet, it freezes, or you lose audio, hit that recycle button below my photo. There's a play button, a stop button, and a recycle button. If you hit that recycle button, it will reload the page for you, and that usually clears up any audio or video issues. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our panel. How is everybody this morning?
Fantastic.
Excellent.
I told them to mute their lines before we started, and then I popped in and froze them. I'm going to start introduce Pratiti Shah. She's an HR strategist and executive with over 20 years of experience in all aspects of talent management, human resources, organizational development, and in the nonprofit sector and in for-profit arena. Don McPherson is an employee performance expert with also about 20 years of industry experience. Don's areas of expertise include understanding employee and customer motivations, developing effective leadership, and creating processes for gathering employee feedback. So, without further ado, looks like we'll go ahead and advance to Pratiti's first slide and let her take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mac, and thank you, Dawn, for joining me in this little hour-long adventure together, and thank you all for being with us. I know it's not always easy to make time for these things, so I really appreciate that you've chosen, if you're on the Eastern time zone, then you've chosen to spend potentially a lunchtime with us, and I appreciate that. Hopefully we will make your mealtime palatable. Let's talk a little bit about engagement. So this is one of my favorite topics because it is such a lever of impact. I mean, the most important thing in our organizations is not any of the typical metrics. Obviously, we're mission-based, social service-based nonprofit organizations, and therefore we measure our success by impact. And the notion of engagement, and Don's going to talk quite a bit about how to get to the level of engagement and the measurement of engagement. He's going to talk a little bit about that, and what I'm going to talk about is kind of some key levers to engagement. And I think that this is one of the absolutely most important things that nonprofits especially can focus on, because too often we rely on our mission as the primary motivator, the primary attractor of the talent marketplace, the primary engager of our workforce. And in fact, while that is a really critical part of it, there is so much more to this whole equation of engagement, and there is a very direct link from engagement to having the kind of impact that our organizations want to have. And that's why, to me, this is an absolutely critical piece that we're looking at today, and a really critical topic. So we're going to cover some things that are very practical, that are very feasible, that you can do if you have the luxury of having a human resources person, dedicated resource, or even department, and also things that are portable enough and low cost enough that you can also attend to or begin to address without those resources in place. So leadership teams, folks that are responsible for and looking at the engagement of their staff and looking at talent issues, these are things that you guys can take up right away. Literally, these are things that you can begin to think about later this afternoon or tomorrow. So with that, let's talk about some of the specifics, shall we? So first and foremost, I always like to think in terms of the biggest picture possible, right? And then we go from there. So the way to think about engagement really is the overall. You'll hear me say it as a particular phase, but when we think about zooming out and looking at the entire culture of the organization and the employment life cycle, we think in terms of all the ways in which we interact with someone as they come work in our organization, right? So we have the time in which we're attracting them to our organization all the way through the interview and hiring process, the way that we engage them in our work when they first arrive, so through hopefully a formal onboarding process, something that helps them understand kind of what their work is, how it's related and connected to the mission, and where the organization is in the overall environment of that particular subsector or community or the sector as a whole. We want to motivate the person to do their very best work at the beginning, but throughout their time with us, so making sure that they're motivated at the highest levels of performance throughout all of the work that they may do. We want to make sure that we're developing them, so not just for the next position, but also so that they can contribute in the best possible way in the work that they're doing right now, and also getting them prepared potentially for their career, whether it's with our organizations or not, which is something we're not always thrilled to talk about and think about, but sometimes given small organizations, we think in terms of, okay, how do we best develop this person for right now, for the next position, and potentially for their career. And then finally, we're rewarding them for the work that they do, right? So each of these is a touch point. Each of these phases of this employee life cycle, and it is truly never ending. It is a cycle. We want to think about what are the ways, what is the experience that they have at each stage from the moment that they take interest through doing the work and being rewarded for it. What is it that they experience, and how can we use that experience to further engage them into the processes on which we work and the mission that we're trying to accomplish? So the culture of the organization wraps around all of this, right? So we know this. The culture seeps into everything that we do, and likewise, all of the processes that we use around employment, around getting our work done, all of those things push on the culture. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. But the point of introducing this framework is to be highly, highly mindful and deliberate around each of these phases of the cycle, and knowing that they shape the culture and that the culture shapes these experiences. Because being deliberate means that we are then creating the experience that we want rather than one that happens accidentally, if you will, or simply through circumstance. What we want to do is make sure that in all of these phases and in how we shape the culture, it is purposeful. It is aligned with our mission. It's aligned with the strategy that accomplishes the mission, and that the culture is then reflective of those things. We want all of those things to align. We want to make sure that they are reflective of each other and that they're putting the employee in the best possible place to do their work and to bring to bear their best performance. Okay, so keep this in mind. We're going to actually talk next about some very specific levers that you can pull and push to get the best type of engagement, and then we'll go into Don's expertise and talk a little bit about measurement. But keep this in mind as we go through the next pieces, because again, it always comes back to what is the experience that the employee is having? How are you shaping that experience? And how are you leveraging the culture to ensure that it too is bringing out the best in the employees, and that it's really well aligned with the mission and the strategy to make sure that the organization is able to accomplish its mission. Okay? All right, so let's head on to the next little piece. I think that these are some really important levers for you guys to think about as you think about, so what is this thing what are the things that create engagement? You know, this very ethereal word of engagement. So what creates that? So first of all, in the environment. So, and again, all of these things make up the culture. But first of all, in the environment, let's talk about a few things specifically. I hear this from employees everywhere I go in the sector is they want to be able to trust. They want to be able to trust their colleagues and their leadership. And to the extent that you can create the trust, especially for leadership, employees are generally more engaged with leaders with whom they trust. So I've literally heard employees say, I got another offer and I would normally have gone, but I am staying specifically because I trust my leader to accomplish this mission. And I trust my leader to take care of me and my career in the best way possible. So how do we create trust? The key to trust is ultimately consistency. It's consistency between action and language. It's consistency of action, so doing things that are predictable and that are the same, doing what you say you're going to do and being accountable for that. The consistency is the absolute key to building that level of trust. The second thing that I see all the time in organizations is, and this has increased over the last several years, is a really strong desire for participation. Specifically what we mean by participation is the notion that employees want to participate in the shaping of the organization. So they would like to have a say in the culture, in the way that the culture manifests. So how we celebrate wins, how we get together and know each other, how we recognize and reward each other and recognize our colleagues for work done. People want to say. They really do. And so what I would say is, you know, look for opportunities in which people can participate in the things that affect them in an organization. Is this going to be possible everywhere? No. Probably we're not going to set a strategic plan with a 50-person organization with all 50 people participating at every step. That's probably not going to work, and that's not going to be the best possible thing. So the question is looking for places where they can participate in a healthy, constructive way, and asking them what those things might be, where they feel the need to participate and where they feel like they would get the most out of that participation. So many of you have this happening already. I've seen it happen through working groups, task forces, staff committees, things like that. Often in the action planning that takes place after a survey or a series of focus groups, the action planning can very much involve employees and consist of a working group or a task force who set about as a project team to work on some very specific things. So, but having that level of participation gives everyone a stake in what's happening in the organization, and it keeps them engaged not just on the work, but on how we do work and how it ultimately gets done. The next piece is interesting. This whole notion of connection, I think, is not unique necessarily to our sector, but what is unique about it to our sector and to mission-based organizations is that people are there for our mission. I mean, that part is true. At times we over-rely on the mission as a huge and sometimes singular part of our value proposition in bringing people on board. However, it is a really big deal. And it's okay that we can say that out loud. So the question then becomes, how do you keep people connected to that? How do you keep people's connection, whether they are putting out policy-based letters to congressional staff, or they are sending thank you notes to funders, or they are working on your web platform, or things, or even things that may not seem as connected. Maybe they're working on operations or finance, as many of you who are on today's webinar are. How do you keep that connection when it's not a daily direct line of sight to the mission? Because that's why they're there. So let's make sure that we're keeping them highly engaged from the point of view of, look, everything that you do ultimately helps us accomplish our mission. And think about how you want to create that line of sight on a daily and regular basis. Finally, we all know the importance of flexibility. It's been talked about so much, even in mainstream media. We've all heard the adventures of Silicon Valley in this, especially around extreme flexibility, and then in the more recent years, kind of a pullback to a more traditional workforce and a little bit less flexibility. We saw this happen at Yahoo specifically, which is one that often comes to people's minds. Flexibility has now surpassed compensation as one of the key deciding factor in whether or not someone takes a job. So think about, and not all organizations are set up the same way. Not all organizations will be able to have the same level of flexibility. Not everyone can have, for instance, a hotel environment, right, where people just kind of come in when they want and they work from wherever they want, whenever they want. That may work in a lot of organizations, and I think that's great. Think about what is truly going to work for your organization. Where is the synergy? Does it happen in person? Does it happen through regular, consistent meeting, whether it's virtual or not? How can you offer a level of flexibility for people to actually manage their life? I always say that I think the whole notion of work-life balance is a bit of a misnomer because it's a myth, right, to think that you can, quote, balance these two huge things that are ultimately embedded with each other. Your work is part of your life, and your life is part of your work. There is no artificial separation of these two. So instead of balance, I like to think of it more as integration. And what can you do to make sure that people have the flexibility to make their lives look like whatever they need in that integration? How can you make sure that they can manage their life, whether they are caregivers, whether they are caregivers to multiple parties, older, younger, etc., whether they are staying in touch with family and loved ones who are outside of the area, whatever their case may be. Think about how you want to offer the flexibility and continue whatever momentum needs to happen in your organization, whether it's collaboration, synergistic conversations, etc. But think very deliberately about how you might be able to offer that. Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about communication, because communication is one of those things that we hear about all the time in organizations, and I'm sure that, Don, you probably have millions of statistics about this, what comes out of the metrics that you guys use and that you advise on communication, because it is so incredibly critical to everything that we do, and it is so much on people's minds. So what I would tell you is it's about two things, right? Every piece of communication is about the message that you're sending out and the media that you choose to use to send it. So think about both. What is the message? What is it that you're conveying? And at the same time, think about what is not included in that message. Ultimately, communication is like art, right? It's comprised of the negative and positive space. So think really critically about what you're not saying. Whatever you're not saying as leaders will be filled in by the organization and by staff. So we were talking at the beginning of at the top of the hour as we were getting set up. For those of you who are fans, I definitely am. You know, the music world lost an icon last week, and immediately what started happening in the absence of information is people started to conjecture about what may have happened and that led up to the loss of Prince, the singer, and kind of was there a drug involvement? Was there a heart condition? Was there an underlying set of symptoms that we didn't know about? So the same is true ultimately, and not with such a grave topic, but the same is true ultimately with our organizations. People fill in what you don't tell them, and it is absolutely okay to say, we're not ready to talk about that right now, or it would have a negative impact on people if we talk to you about what's going on with this particular area, department, etc. So be forthcoming, and be forthcoming about what you can't talk about yet. Think as well about the media that you use. I think too often we rely not just on email because it's easy, and because in many cases we have staff that's geographically dispersed, or it's too big of a staff to get in one room, or people are on varying schedules, etc. But there's more to communication than email and in person. So think about who are your key influencers in your organization. How can you leverage them to help you with your strategy and help you convey what you need to convey. So make sure that you're using everything that you have at your disposal to get the best communication possible. Little bit on performance, because it's something else that I hear about all the time with organizations. Staff really want to talk about performance. Not surprising, right? Because this is where they live. They want to know how they're doing. And one of the key things is feedback. And nobody has the patience anymore to wait for a once-a-year review to hear their feedback. So make sure that people are hearing feedback on a much more regular basis, even if it's informal. It doesn't have to be something that's terribly, formal and systematic and standardized. It can be a conversation. But let's make sure that those conversations are happening. Ultimately, it leads to better performance. Let's also make sure that we are focusing on things like a goal-based system rather than something that's job description-based, that we're reinforcing that connection, and that we're focusing on rewards and development, which we often feel like in our sector we don't have budget for, right? But in fact, there is work as development. I always say to people, look, it's not a class that changes people's lives and education. It is usually doing the work or being helped through doing a new assignment that helps people. So think in those terms on development, and think in terms of what is going to be important to your staff on rewards. Both much deeper conversations than we're getting into today, but just a couple of thoughts on that. Really know what's important to people on both of those fronts and make sure that you are appealing to those things. These last couple of things I'm going to say are very, very subtle, and so I just want to touch on them for a second. More often than not, I see in a lot of organizations with whom I work that staff don't realize just how committed their leadership is to the entire idea of talent and engagement and culture. So what I would say to you is make sure that they know that this is so top of mind for you that you took an hour out of your Monday, a few hours into your work week, to spend some time thinking about and talking about this notion of engagement and talent and commitment, and your commitment to that is shown by attending this. Make sure that they know that this is an explicit commitment that is made by leadership to staff. Knowing that is really half the battle, because people don't realize how committed their leadership is. And then finally, just really make sure that you're using your ambassadors, whether they show up in the form of managers, if you have a big enough organization that has multiple levels, your leadership group, your entire leadership group, not just the head of the organization. And if you have HR folks, make sure that they are not just focusing on compliance, but really going so far as to handle that, what I call the internal PR of the organization, so that they're making sure that they're saying to people, hey, you know what, we really do care about this issue, and here are the numbers of ways in which we show that we care and we show that it is important to us. So make sure that you're leveraging those folks as well. So with that, having gone through a few of the levers, I'm going to turn things over to Don, who is going to take us through kind of how to measure and implement engagement and talk even further about some other levers that he's seen. So with that, Don?
Thanks, Pratici. And before I get into my content, I wanted to just give a little bit of background on myself further than Mac had laid out at the onset of the webinar. I've been in this employee measurement space, employee engagement space for 20 years. The first 4 years were at American Express, and then the last 16 or 17 have been with Modern Survey, where I was president and co-founder. And now I am just completing my third month with Aon. So Modern Survey was acquired by Aon the beginning of February, and the reason why I say that is because I'm going to be talking about a lot of the research that Modern Survey has conducted on the employee experience and on employee engagement, and I'm also going to sprinkle in some of the things that I've learned during my 3 months at Aon, and I'll be referencing some of the research that we have at our fingertips here. So I'm going to start out by talking about what drives engagement and how those drivers are pretty transcendent across industries, generations, job levels, etc. I'll talk about the responsibility of engagement and who owns it. I'll talk about best practices for measuring engagement. and I'll talk about the best people practices of extraordinary organizations, and then I'll lay out a 3-year strategy for creating a culture of engagement at your organization. So let's talk about those drivers of engagement, and Pratici had hit on a number of them. And the surprising thing that we've found in our research is that they really don't vary very much across industries. So the things that drive us in manufacturing are the same things that drive us in healthcare or financial services, and even with nonprofit organizations. Our drivers through our research are confidence in the organization, career development, personal accomplishment, recognition, fair pay, some of the things that Pratici had talked about, but in that order. So somebody in manufacturing wants to work for an organization that has a bright future and that they have confidence working there. Somebody who's a millennial, they want career development opportunities. Somebody who is a CEO of an organization wants a sense of personal accomplishment. These are human drivers, and it doesn't really matter where you are in your career or how old you are or what industry you're working in. These things drive engagement almost universally. Now, again, I'll just mention what we've seen as the top drivers of engagement. Confidence in the organization and communication is so central to this. So hitting on a topic that Pratici had mentioned, the more frequently people are talking about where the organization is going, the better they're going to feel about the organization and the prospects of that organization. Career development is one of the second strongest driver of engagement. People want to learn new things and advance their career opportunities. Personal accomplishment, recognition, and we see pay actually not as the 5th strongest driver, but according to our most recent research, around 7th or 8th. Now, I wanted to mention pay because it is an important one. It's the absence of pay that makes disengagement much more prevalent. So you hear people talking about, I don't get paid enough to do this, or, so-and-so is making more at this organization and I'm doing the same work that they're doing. Oftentimes, pay is not necessarily the issue, it's something else. I don't get paid enough for this lack of recognition or this sense of ambiguity within the organization. Very rarely is pay a top driver of engagement at an organization. Another thing that we're seeing is, as an interesting driver of engagement, is enabling infrastructure. And this is something that Aon has been studying, and really I got a great education from one of my colleagues, and I was saying, well, tell me more about this enabling infrastructure. And he says, particularly at very large organizations, there are so many barriers, there's red tape, there's just obstacles to getting work done. And the more leaders can remove these barriers, the more engaged people are going to be. And so we're seeing this at the very, very large organizations where there's this red tape, there's so many processes and procedures to get work done, so many approvals, and great leaders are able to remove these barriers so their employees can peak perform and their engagement can rise up. Now you might be thinking, okay, transcendent nature of engagement, this really runs contrary to what we're hearing about engaging younger workers, millennials, or even we're going to be seeing a new generation of employees coming into the workplace. Certainly, research is showing that they want different things. And the truth is that's not the case. In fact, we found that millennials want the same thing as baby boomers when it comes to driving engagement, but there is a bit of a twist. And that's the difference in expectations. So while recognition, a key driver of engagement, or career development is a key driver of engagement, while a baby boomer may expect a conversation about career development maybe a couple times a year with their manager, a younger employee is going to expect that conversation to occur much more frequently, maybe even on a monthly basis. So you have to have that understanding when you're having conversations with younger employees, just how frequently should we be having these conversations about what drives them, what they want from the employee experience. So this is research that we've been conducting since 2008. The most recent study that we conducted was done in March of this year, so very, very recently, and we're seeing that the things that drive engagement in one industry are almost always the same in another. One of my favorite topics when it comes to employee engagement is having a discussion around what engagement is and whose responsibility is it. So again, we went out to the U.S. workforce, we did a random sample of employees and asked them, do you understand what engagement is? And we just gave them the ability to say yes or no. Do you understand the concept of engagement? We found that only 50% of people who responded to that survey said, yes, I understand what the concept of engagement is. So this is self-reported, and we know that when we self-report, we are a little bit more confident in ourselves than we probably should be. And so 50% is probably inflated. The fact of the matter is, if you asked any CEO or any CHRO, is engagement important to your organization's success? The vast majority, probably close to 90-95%, would say yes, it is important. The issue is that only half of employees even know what engagement is or say they know what engagement is. So we've got a real disconnect here. We want it in our organizations, but our employees don't know what it is. And when we get to whose responsibility is, in fact, we asked those 50% who said, yes, I know what engagement is, we asked them, whose responsibility is it? And the interesting findings were about 40% said it's the direct manager's responsibility. 12% said it's senior leadership's responsibility. 17% said it's my responsibility, mine as the employee. And the other, about a third, said it's all three equally. And that's the position that we take, is it's really a shared responsibility. In fact, the organization makes it possible, and Pratiji was talking about the environment. Well, the organization creates the environment, and the organization I'm kind of lumping in as a big entity, but senior leadership is very influential in creating that environment to make engagement possible. There are a handful of things that the environment needs to contain, and trust is absolutely critical, a critical one. There's values, too, that the organization needs to have, whether they're written values or just values that are understood throughout the organization without having them written down. And then fair pay is one of those environmental things to make engagement possible. Leaders drive engagement, and this is an interesting thing. So we've got the organization making it possible. The organization is responsible for it. And then leaders are responsible for driving it. So if the organization's made it possible, created the environment, leaders will drive it by leveraging those drivers that I had mentioned, confidence and career development, personal accomplishment, etc. Notice that I'm not talking about managers, though, because it's bigger than that. It's senior leadership, it's direct managers, it's even individual contributors. Individual contributors can recognize their peers, can recognize their managers. They can fill others with a sense of personal accomplishment. So I'm using the term leader very broadly here. And then the last piece is getting employees involved. So I've worked for great organizations. I've worked with great organizations that have the environment in place. They've got great leaders driving engagement. But they've never really set the expectation that employees should own their own engagement. And if we're going to have a culture of engagement, it's absolutely crucial and critical that we set expectations that employees bring their best to work every day. Now, I've done a lot of speaking around the country, and I always ask this question, okay, how many of you in the audience, and it's typically a head of HR in the audience, how many of you believe that employees should bring their best to work? And about 80 to 90% of hands go up. It's kind of a softball question. If you're a business owner, or you're a CEO or CHRO, the answer to that ought to be yes. But I ask another question. How many of you set it as an expectation in the interviewing process, at this organization we expect people to bring their best to work, and if that's not you, that's okay, but this is the wrong place for you? Sheepishly, only a handful of hands, maybe 5% of the people in the audience, will agree that they do that. If we're going to have a culture of engagement, we have to get employees involved, and we have to have them owning their own engagement. And the last thing that I'll say, and I understand that the slides may be being cut off a little bit, and I apologize for that, but the last piece there is that HR can act as a catalyst, but it's not an owner of engagement. HR doesn't own engagement. HR can be the fiduciary of the employee survey. It can be it can train leaders on how to be engaging and what these drivers of engagement are and how to use these drivers of engagement. But if your organization has placed the ownership of engagement on HR, you're going to fail. You have to have these three things working in concert. The organization makes it possible, leaders drive it, and the employee himself or herself needs to own their own engagement. Now I get asked a lot, how do you go ahead and implement a best practice around measuring the employee experience? And this is what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And a lot has changed around the frequency of measurement and how you go out and measure employee engagement. And Pratici had talked about the employee life cycle, and that's what we measure. We measure from the moment somebody is onboarded in the organization, we measure their engagement, we measure employee opinions and experience at the end of their tenure at the organization as well. But any healthy organization, just like any healthy human being, ought to be seeing a doctor once a year to understand what the health of the organization is or to see what their individual health is. So I'm using a metaphor here. I believe that whether you feel good or you don't feel good, you ought to see a doctor to get a physical every year. And the same thing is true for your organization. You need to do it at least annually. Now, there are lots of organizations that are moving toward pulse surveying, measuring twice a year, every quarter, even every month. And that can be good, but if that measurement is not followed up with action by leaders, you're not going to get anywhere. It's just like stepping on a scale every day for a week and expecting to get healthier or lose weight. It just doesn't happen. So in terms of frequency, you can measure the employee experience or employee engagement as often as you are able to follow up on the feedback. A lot of organizations, that's annually. For other organizations, that's more frequently than annually. That's quarterly or monthly. But you have to make sure that the measurement is followed up very quickly by action. The other thing that's important to talk about is what else besides engagement is important. And in order to peak perform, there are really three things that need to occur. You do need an engaged workforce. It's absolutely critical to making sure that the organization reaches its goals. But we also say you need to measure capabilities, too. You can be an engaged employee, but if you're not capable of doing the job, you're not going to peak perform. At the same token, you can have engaged and capable people, but if they're not putting their efforts and energy in the right place, they don't have the appropriate direction, you're not going to peak perform either. So we say that if you're going to measure the employee experience, measure how engaged people are. That's crucial. Measure whether or not they have the capabilities to do the job, the tools and the resources, the training, whether they're working together as a team, etc. And then measure the direction that they're getting. The communication from leadership, whether the organization has goals that they're trying to achieve, whether the organization has values, those sorts of things. Those are three things, three kind of super dimensions that you ought to be measuring if you're going to understand whether or not your organization is positioned to peak perform. I'm going to quickly talk about the people practices of extraordinary organizations, and this is something that we've been measuring over the last 8 years, and we found that Extraordinary organizations do 5 things consistently. I think consistently is a really important term, and I know that Pratici had talked about it as well. Extraordinary organizations have a set of values that are known and understood throughout the organization. It's not enough to have values that are on a badge or written on a wall. They have to be known and understood by employees throughout the organization. And those values are really important in giving people a framework for how to make decisions and how to behave within the organization. Extraordinary organizations measure quality and communicate the results. They measure customer satisfaction and communicate the results. Now, it's not just enough to measure and communicate to the team responsible for these things. Transparency throughout the organization around your quality and your customer satisfaction or patient satisfaction or member satisfaction or whatever it is you're measuring there has to be communicated throughout the organization. Now, keep in mind that if the number one driver of engagement, according to our research, is confidence in the future of the organization, this transparency around how we're doing on quality and how we're doing on customer satisfaction helps to reaffirm where the organization is going and how effective the organization is doing. And I really love Pratici's metaphor around negative and positive space. In the absence of information, people create their own stories, and those stories are not as good, not as positive as the state of an organization. So it's really important to communicate the good and the bad for the organization, because people are going to make up the bad if that message is not being communicated. Extraordinary organizations also provide training. They provide it annually, hopefully more frequently than annually, but at least annually. And they also provide annual performance reviews. Again, hopefully their conversations around performance are more frequent than annually, but at a minimum it has to be on an annual basis. And what we found is that those people who say, yes, my organization does all 5 of these things, they're more than twice as likely to be fully engaged, and they're about 1/6 as likely to be disengaged as somebody who says no to one or more of these things. So these are just a handful of very simple people practices that you can put in place. You can put in place very quickly. You don't have to spend a lot of money to put these things in place. In fact, most organizations of a certain size ought to be doing most, if not all, of these things. So let's talk about a 3-year plan for creating a culture of engagement. First of all, measuring engagement is critical to this. If you're not measuring engagement, you're never going to understand how effectively you're converting in people and creating that culture of engagement. So the first thing you need to do is do your employee engagement survey and have your senior leaders act on the results. Communicate, over-communicate what the results were and what actions are being taken. And the best practice around communication is on a monthly cadence. This is what you told us through the employee survey. This is what we are planning to do, this is what we've done, and this is what you'll hear from when you'll hear from us again. So those 4 steps. This is what you told us. This is what we're going to do, this is what we've done, and this is when you'll hear from us again. So that's the first year. It's pretty simple. Have your senior leadership team act on the results of the survey. Second year, measure again, roll out the survey results deeper within the organization, maybe at the director level or all the way down to the manager level. And get those managers acting on the results and having conversations with the members of their team around the engagement results. All the while you're doing this, and from the beginning of this process, you need to be having conversations with employees around what your expectations are and how they show up for work. So even as early as in the interviewing process, it's important to let people know that at this organization, we expect people to bring their best to work every day. It's called employee engagement, and we expect people to be engaged if they're going to work here. And if that's not you, this is not the place for you. At the end of 3 years of having those conversations with future employees and present employees, every single employee in the organization knows what employee engagement is, knows what drives engagement, and knows how to use those drivers of engagement. And they also know what their responsibility is for owning their own engagement. That's the Holy Grail. And you know, when everybody knows those things, you have arrived and you have created that culture of engagement. For most organizations, small and mid-sized organizations, you can create it in 3 years. For larger organizations, maybe it's a 5-year journey, and we're talking about thousands of employees here. But it can be done. I've seen it done, and you need to do it in that way. Measure it and communicate what the expectations are throughout the entire organization. So with that, Mac, I'm going to turn it back to you, and you can facilitate the question and answer session.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Don. And we have a couple of questions we're going to go over with our panel here, but if you have a question, if you raise some concerns from what you've heard already, please jot them down in that Q&A box below Don's picture, and we'll take care of those as they come in. Typically, we can get to everybody. Sometimes we have to follow up afterwards. But I kind of wanted to expand on what both of you all had talked about. I'm sure both of you hear this a lot. The initial pushback is, I actually talked to a guy last week around performance reviews and stuff like that, and he was talking about, we don't have time for new technology. We don't have time to implement new anything. We're still doing paper and an annual performance review. I'm sure you hear this a lot about engagement. There's just barely enough time to get everything done. Now we're being asked to measure and follow up again and follow up some more. And what is your all's answer to those types of, there's just not enough time, there's just not enough resources to do this right?
I can jump in and then.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, no. Oh, my goodness, we're all so polite. I love that. Okay, you know what? Let me do 2 seconds. I'll do 2 minutes or so and toss it back to you, Don, because I'm actually curious as to your thoughts on this, too. But I think that's exactly right. I think a lot of people feel like they are cumbersome and they're a burden, especially if you have multiple direct reports. You're writing and writing and writing, and it feels like you're just writing a bunch of narrative, and it can be very annoying. And I think at that point you have to think about, what are people getting from that particular system? And by system, I don't even necessarily mean an online actual system facilitated process. What I mean is whatever you use, whether it is pen and paper Word doc or shared Google Doc or more kind of specific system that you're using online from any of the companies out there who are doing that. I think the question is, does this actually accomplish what we want it to? Does it improve performance? Does it give people good feedback, et cetera? And then rethink it potentially, because the crux of the matter is people need to know if they're doing what they need to do, right, to accomplish the mission. That's the main thing. Is my work feeding into a bigger picture that helps us have impact, that helps us support and accomplish our mission? That's the first purpose. The second purpose is, am I learning and growing? Am I getting feedback about what's working and what's not working and where I can improve? If it doesn't address those two things, then the system needs to be looked at anyway. You can write 6 pages of information and not have it be very worthwhile. So I would say put the emphasis on the key purposes and the conversation that needs to come from trying to meet those two purposes, rather than a system that's going to make you kind of jump through hoops or write a lot of stuff or fill out multiple spreadsheets of feedback or any of those kinds of things. The focus really needs to be on the information and the conversation and the connection to the mission. Don, you were going to add some stuff, yeah?
Yes. What I would, and Mac, your question was, what do I say to somebody who says, I don't have time to do this, to measure and to follow up and do the action planning? And my response would be, I would ask 2 questions, and then I would come up with a recommendation. The first question I'm going to ask is, are you getting the best efforts and performance from your employees? Now, I know the answer to that question. It's kind of a softball question. The answer is going to be no. And then I'm going to ask another question. That question is going to be, okay, do your employees have the capabilities to do the job? Okay, and the chances are going to be yes, 50% of the time, no, 50% of the time. If the answer is no, then we need to get new employees in. We've got to replace the team or some of the team members. But if the answer is yes, then I say, okay, you're not getting best efforts, but they have the capabilities of doing the job. Then we have an engagement issue. And if we have an engagement issue and you don't have time to fix the engagement issue, you're going to be in this situation forever. But if you invest, and really measuring and doing the action is investing in improving the performance of employees and getting the best out of them, getting them motivated, getting them engaged. And so you're going to invest some time now to free up time down the road. It's just like training. You know, you hear managers who say, well, I'm going to do it myself. I can't spend the time to train this employee or this individual. I'll just do it myself. But you're not enabling that person for success later on, because you're going to just have to train them either later or you're going to have to do the work again later. So this is really an investment, and it's going to pay off in the months ahead or the year, 18 months, 24 months later. So you have to make that investment, and that investment is time and effort and energy on the part of the leader.
Okay. That's what I thought you guys were going to say. So we have some questions that are trickling in right now. I just want to let everybody know, we don't know why some of Don's slides were getting cut off at the bottom. I think that happened when we imported them into this user interface. I am going to email everybody on the webinar today a correct version of the slides this afternoon that will have no cutoff at the bottom. So just keep an eye out for that. And also, this webcast is being recorded. Use the exact same link you used to get here, the exact same login credentials, and you can watch this as much as you want for the next 12 months. So you can get as much Pratici and Don as you want. Pratici, I have one. We'll shoot the first question to you. How do you determine what types of annual training are best for a organization? We have Carrie, who said that they did a survey and the needs appear to be all over the map. How does she prioritize what she needs to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Carrie, first of all, congratulations and kudos to you for taking the time to do that survey per much of the very wise counsel given by Don. I think that is fantastic that you guys are taking professional development and measurement that seriously, and so you're clearly ready to use the information that you're getting. So I think that's fantastic. The thing about the training is, I guess, first of all, I would back up a little bit to just say, are we sure that the training itself is the answer? So you now have a set of information around what the development needs are for your organization. And sure, they're all over the map, I imagine, by skill grouping, so some soft skills, some technical skills related to what you guys do, some things that people need that have been in the workforce for longer, maybe around people skills, management skills, supervisory skills, and then probably some things that are much more kind of entry level to the workforce skills as well, and everything in between. So I guess my first question would be, which of these are really best addressed by quote traditional training? And I'm assuming that that's what you mean is traditional training in your question. So I think that's the first thing is what is here that can be addressed by typical training? So is it things like, I need to do better PowerPoints, for instance, in which case, yeah, absolutely, that can be handled by training. If it is a different take on that, which is, how do I give better presentations? So, I represent my organization and I have to speak on panels, or I have to speak at conferences or to community groups. How can I be the best presenter possible? That may not be something that is best handled by training. You may want to have a public speaking coach work with that person, and I think you are, especially if they're a little bit further on in their career and they have a little bit of experience under their belt doing presentations, on that particular example, you're likely to get a better bang for your buck. So I think the first thing is, which of these things are best addressed by traditional training? Then where do we get that training? What is going to be most cost-effective and effective, period, for us? Is it external? Is it internal? Is it something that may be offered externally, but we really want to be clear, per what Dawn was saying about organizational values, we want to be clear about what our way of looking at this topic is, or our set of values around this topic, and we want that to be conveyed, in which case it might be something in-house. It might also be something that is very well handled by peer groups. So often we think in terms of manager training. I've seen a lot of success happen with facilitated cohorts of managers. So we get all of our managers together to talk about what does it mean to be a manager at this organization? What are the things that, again, going back to Don's point about value, what are the things that we value? What are the most important things we need to be doing for our people? What are the key challenges that we're facing right now? How can we best support each other? Those sessions have ultimately been as effective as management skills for those who might have access to the management skills but just aren't using them very well. So I think that's then the second thing, is how do we want to address this particular development need? Is it through external training, in-house training? Is it not through training but through peer support, peer coaching, mentoring, executive coaching, or emerging leader coaching? Or something else entirely. So I think then you think about that. So it is really kind of a little bit of a flow chart in each of these pieces of information that you've gotten. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I want to make sure to go through kind of that whole process, because I think it's a really important one, and not all organizations are doing what yours is. And so it's really critical, and kudos to you for taking that on.
Not a problem, not a problem. So we have about 4 minutes left. We're probably going to go, if it's all right with you two, we'll go ahead and go over a bit to address some of these questions we have coming in. Don, I'll shoot the next one to you. Linda wants to know about some negatives or anything that might, is a good idea. What kind of pitfalls can she expect if she asks her staff about dissatisfaction? I mean, you know how they're feeling about the company. I can imagine you guys have horror stories about, you know, you did an engagement survey and you found out that everybody just hates life, and, you know, what do you do when that happens? Can you address that kind of thing for us?
So if everybody hates life, wouldn't you want to know that? And wouldn't you want a roadmap for how to fix it? It's the same argument. You know, I used to get this comment more so early in my career, talking to a CEO or head of HR. Well, if we did an engagement survey, I'm afraid of what we might learn. Are you serious? Are you really serious right now? You are in a position of leadership, and you'd rather have your head in the sand versus understand what the health of the organization is. You know, it's sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and understand and feel this feedback and own it. And a key thing here is, remember we were talking about who owns engagement. It doesn't fall all on the leader's hands or on the leader's shoulders. You can get employees involved in fixing the organization. So, you know, to just kind of add on to what Pratichi was talking about with the previous question, you know, getting employees to help clarify where the issues are is very empowering. So getting them involved in fixing the problem or clarifying the issues is an empowering act in and of itself. And so you don't have to own it all as the head of HR or as the CEO. Getting employees, they're still there. They're still employed there. And they benefit just as much as anybody else does when the organization improves.
Okay, perfect. Pratichi, back to you. Evelyn, if you can see Evelyn's question, she's talking about breaking down barriers at her organization. She, you know, that have been created by past managers. So there's some history, there's some culture there that's already negative, favoritism, poor treatment. How can our organization begin to address those types of things and get the course headed in the other direction?
Yeah, Evelyn, you are seriously having some fun right now, aren't you? Wow, that is super fun, I'm sure, and realistically really stressful. I think the most important thing you can do is to name it, which sounds so terribly elementary and even pedestrian. But what I've noticed in working with organizations through culture shifts is a lot of times employees get lost because they don't know if the change is a phase. And for those who liked the past, maybe it worked for them in some particular way, they're just waiting it out to see if it's a phase, and they'll just kind of wait it out until the phase is over. For those who are excited about the new way of doing and being, they're not sure whether to get comfortable because they don't know if it's real or permanent. And I'm sure what you're thinking yourself is, no, but we've said all of that. We've said that this is a new way and that this is, the old ways are no longer here, et cetera. I think you have to name it as an actual transformation or culture shift or new phase, because people may have heard that, but they didn't necessarily internalize it. Increasingly, what I'm realizing in organizations is because there is so much going on that it can be a little bit like that very kind of horrific cliche of the frog in boiling water. And so I think first of all, name it and say, we no longer stand for XYZ. This is a new phase. We do stand for ABC. Again, going back to Don's point about having organizational values that people can anchor to and hook into. So I think it's important to name it and say that in our new phase, this is how we work and this is how we get work done. And this is, and I know it's a change, and acknowledge that. Acknowledge the fact that the change may be difficult for people, and that you or your leadership or whoever is going to kind of own that, as Don was talking about ownership, that we're going to get you through it. So we will help you to do it. And they have a responsibility in embracing this change, because it sounds like it's positive changes, but everyone won't view them as positive. But it is important to get those who do view them as positive, get them on board and get them rolling towards the right outcomes and ensure that they are helping move things along. Again, it's going back to that whole notion of who are your internal key influencers, and getting them to buy into it as well and getting them to move it along. So name it, state that this is the new phase and what it stands for, as well as what you no longer stand for, and then make sure that people are equipped to handle that change, including getting the right influencers and cheerleaders, if you will, to kind of support it as you begin that process. Perfect.
And we'll do one more question. As everybody can see on their screen, we have our next webcast, is a paneled webcast, is the end of May. It's on a Tuesday, the 24th. We're going to be talking about retirement plan development and negotiation at nonprofits. We have a full-person panel. It's going to be very robust. It's actually worth one CPE for your CPA friends out there. So come back next month. Don, we're getting a lot of questions like this, and I'm sure in your field you get a lot of questions like this. Maybe every conversation starts the same way. We want examples of how to measure, good questions, good resources. So when you get that question, I know this is your bread and butter and how you pay your mortgage is all of this, but how do we address this? Maybe how can you start? What's a good way to begin starting it rather than giving away the house on exactly what tools to use and stuff like that?
So there are a lot of resources out there and a lot of great vendors who can help an organization measure the employee experience. And you don't have to pay a ton of money in order to get it, but you typically get what you pay for when you choose where to go. You can do it yourself, but that's only going to get you so far. The things that are important to measure when it comes to engagements, our model is predicated on a say, stay, and strive structure. So we want to know, are people saying good things about the organization? Are they acting as advocates? Are they willing to stay within the organization? Do they want to stay here? Do they want to make a career for themselves here? And are they able to perform their best within the organization? So those are a handful of things to look at: willingness to refer, intent to stay, the pride that they feel for the organization, their sense of future, and the degree to which they're inspired by the organization. If you measure those things and then the drivers of engagement, confidence in the organization, career development, personal accomplishment, recognition, fair pay, you're going to have a pretty good engagement survey. And so that's a starting point. If you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to share our model with you and some of our content. Happy to do that, or have a conversation and put you in touch with one of my teammates here. But this is really an important thing for not only our organizations, but for society. And I'll just kind of get on my soapbox for 20 seconds here. Imagine if you're absolutely miserable going to work and being at work 40 or 50 hours a week. Chances are you're not your best person when you go home. You're not the best husband. You're not the best wife, father, mother, partner, friend, member of the community. And the more we can get our employees engaged and doing their best work at home, the more our society is going to benefit from it. Not only at home, but in our communities. And so I see it as a moral imperative. And whatever you do to enhance the employee experience, we will all benefit.
Amen. Well, I appreciate everybody for attending today. Don't forget to come back next month. Like I said, May 24th, same time. It's on a Tuesday, I believe, instead of a Monday. But Pratici, Don, thank you so much for your time and effort today. We really appreciate you all being with us.
Thanks, Max.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Don, and thank you, everybody, for attending.
All right. Everybody have a great week. Bye-bye. All right, guys. Thank you so much.